From the headquarters of Tell Us Your English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Sonia Gray. Polls have closed in Zimbabwe, where there has been a high turnout in the country's first election since the ousting of former President Robert Mugabe. Queues began to form even before the polls opened. The incumbent president, Emmerson Mnangagwa, of the ruling leftist party ZANU-PF, has been leading in opinion polls, albeit by a small margin. Just behind Mnangagwa is the 40-year-old Nelson Chamisa, a lawyer who's vying to become the country's youngest head of state, at the leader of the pro-neoliberal MDF. If no candidate wins more than half of the votes, a runoff election will be held on the 8th of September.
I voted for Emmerson Mnangagwa because there are a lot of things we have seen him change even before he has been elected. So if he wins, there will be the same progress. I believe in him.
We are very happy because everything is going peacefully. No violence, no harassment. Everything is going peacefully, smoothly. Well, we just thank our leaders for encouraging us peace.
After casting his vote, President Mnangagwa insisted that the election process remained peaceful. A day before the elections, Mugabe made his first public appearance in 8 months and announced that he'd be voting for the opposition, a move that surprised his former ally Mnangagwa. More than 5.5 million people reportedly re-registered to vote. Former Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe can be seen here casting his vote in a Harare township. Mugabe, 94, one of the last big men of African revolutionary politics, made no comment to reporters as he cast his ballot around lunchtime, accompanied by his wife, Grace. As a guerrilla leader, as the head of the ZANU movement, Mugabe played a decisive role in ending white minority apartheid rule in Zimbabwe in 1980. With Mugabe's recent announcement that he would be voting for the opposition, Zimbabwean President Emmerson Mnangagwa has accused him of striking a deal with the MDCs, Nelson Chamisa, ZANU-PF's main challenger.
That if the ballot is an appropriate one, a genuine one, and not a bastardized or a fake one, victory is certain for the people. The people have spoken, the people are speaking, and it's clear that the vote is a vote for victory, a vote for freedom, a vote for democracy, a vote for a new Zimbabwe. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.
Other news now. In a statement, the White House has warned that the sanctions against Daniel Ortega's government in Nicaragua will continue. The Trump administration reiterated its condemnation of alleged violence and human rights abuses committed by the Nicaraguan government. According to Washington, the responsibility lies with the president and his wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo. However, U.S. journalist and author Max Blumenthal, who has recently returned from Nicaragua, has just published 2 pieces on his investigative outlet, the Gray Zone Project, that paint a very different picture. One is a breakdown of the casualties list being flaunted by pro-opposition forces. The other is an exclusive interview with President Ortega. So Max, take us through this figure of 450 people supposedly having been murdered under the direct orders of President Ortega. Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, these numbers are a dangerous lie that have been conceived by soft power NGOs and by Washington. What these numbers actually reflect is the conflation of all accidents and unnatural deaths that occurred in Nicaragua since April. I wrote a piece drawing on the study of independent researcher Enrique Hendrix's path-breaking study, Monopolizing Death, which shows that, in fact, from April to early July, possibly more Sandinista supporters were killed than opposition elements, including armed militants by pro-government forces. And so what figures like Vice President Mike Pence or Human Rights Watch Executive Director Ken Roth have done is to conflate all of these deaths together and blame them on the government in order to drive the case for regime change and sanctions. We saw the same thing take place in Venezuela and in Syria. And if you can get rid of that echo, it would be easier for me to talk.
Oh, okay. We're going to have our tech team work on that. But let me just ask the next question. What's the motivation behind this? Just prior to us talking, I mentioned that Washington has confirmed it will continue sanctions on Nicaragua. In your article, you specifically mentioned the reintroduction of the NICA Act. So what's at play here, and are you hearing me properly?
Well, the question is whether I can hear myself. And as much as I love the sound of my own voice right now, it's kind of distracting. So basically, I spoke to Daniel Ortega about the effect of sanctions and whether he's prepared to face more, because it appears that Congress is pushing the NICA Act really hard. He's already faced the Global Magnitsky Act, which was tested in Russia and is being applied against his inner circle in order to drive away the business community. Since he entered power, Ortega and the Sandinistas had a tripartite agreement with the business community, unions, and his government to carry out economic policy together. And because of the sanctions, the business community has been increasingly wary of working with the government. The alliance has been fraying and has destabilized the country. It's why when Ortega initiated a national dialogue to try to de-escalate the violence that was sweeping the country, starting in April, we saw so many business leaders like Michael Healy on the other side of the table actually pushing for regime change. And this is the U.S. goal with sanctions in Nicaragua. It will undo a lot of the economic growth we've been seeing. We've been seeing 5% growth yearly and lots of economic gains that I personally witnessed in my travels across the country.
Now, according to an opinion piece by Benjamin Waddell published by the Huffington Post, we are, quote, witnessing the rise of fascism in Nicaragua with regards to President Ortega. You yourself met and interviewed with the president. Does he strike you as a fascist?
Well, regardless of his personal behavior, and he's a very soft-spoken figure, not actually very charismatic, like you would expect from a fascist leader. I didn't detect fascism throughout the country. Actually, opposition outlets like 100% Noticias, which are calling for, or not only Ortega's ouster, but have featured figures like Oscar Rene Vargas calling for hundreds of people to die in an armed attack on Ortega's palace. Jaime Arellano is a pundit on that channel. He's called for the U.S. to arm the opposition. These channels operate openly. Opposition marches proceeded while I was there freely under police protection. I didn't see any sign of fascism. What Waddell ignores, first of all, is that the Sandinista supporters were basically forced for 55 days to fend for themselves as police were ordered to stay in their stations, according to the National Dialogue. And many Sandinistas were lynched, literally burned alive, murdered, kidnapped, and tortured. And I got to meet many of them. And it's really strange how Western media has managed to avoid these droves of people who suffered under opposition violence, which really seems fascistic to me. I should also mention that Benjamin Waddell previously bragged that the National Endowment for Democracy, the American government's regime change arm, had laid the groundwork for insurrection in Nicaragua. And I assume Waddell had special knowledge of that program since he was in the country for 2 years.
Now, Max, you said it was really strange that that traditional media has not reported on the plight of the Sandinistas. Do you really think it's strange?
Well, obviously, you and I are used to this, but it's just that when I would go to meet people who had been at the front line of events, for example, Carla Teresa Torres, who is a anti-narcotics community police officer in Jinotepe, to hear about how their police station was under siege for 55 days, how the opposition attempted to detonate 2 gas tanks outside the police station. I heard from her how her husband, Gabriel de Jesus Vado, was burned alive on video at an opposition roadblock, a roadblock that helped hold an entire neighborhood in Masaya under siege where people were brutalized and tortured. And this is just on video. Anyone can see the video of this police officer being burned alive while opposition militants throw rocks on his head There are countless videos like this, and somehow Western media has managed to ignore it. So it does really serve as an indictment of their biased, one-sided pro-regime change coverage. Unfortunately, having examined their coverage of Ukraine, Syria, Palestine, anywhere that's on the U.S. target board, it isn't surprising.
Okay, well, thanks so much for chatting with us, Max. Sorry about the echo, and I invite any of you who are interested in this particular topic to go to Max's website, The Gray Zone Project, for more details. We have more news in a minute, but first, here's a video from our colleagues in multimedia.
So Obama's talking about all of this with the global warming and that, and a lot of it's a hoax. It's a hoax. I mean, it's a money-making industry, okay? It's a hoax.
Welcome back. Haiti's government has condemned the behavior of people who are trying to bring panic to the country. The comments follow a call for a general strike to push for the resignation of the current president, Jovenel Moise, and also to call for an increase of the minimum wage. Two government officials have asked President Moise to proceed with the designation of a new prime minister after the former stepped down in response to mass protests. And we go now to Puerto Rico, where parents and teachers are standing against school closures. Employees of the Education Department were seen emptying the Theodore Roosevelt School in Mayagüez on the west of the Caribbean island. Social organizations are denouncing that Ricardo Rosselló's government is expecting to close more than 270 schools this year. The measures are part of a wave of austerity-driven policies by the government imposed by the Congress of the United States.
We found out this morning that the trucks of the Department of Education were removing things from the school. We are in a peaceful protest denouncing this violation by the Department of Education, which has not completed legal due process.
Colombia's Minister of Foreign Affairs, Maria Angela Holguin, has traveled to Havana to lead a government delegation of mediators in the ongoing ELN peace talks. The team will continue negotiations with the National Liberation Army in the hope of agreeing to a bilateral ceasefire. Here's our Havana-based correspondent, Laura Prada, with more.
Hello, yes, nice to greet you from Havana. Indeed, this weekend arrived to Cuba the Foreign Minister of Colombia, Maria Angela Holguin, to head a government delegation with the ELN, where they'll be talking about a possible ceasefire and to arrive to concrete results on a peace agreement with the ELN. She is heading this delegation, Maria Angela Holguin is heading this delegation on behalf of the Colombian President Juan Manuel Santos, who will be leaving the post this 7th of August. On her arrival, she met with Cuba's Chancellor Bruno Rodriguez, and they talked about these peace dialogues that are continuing developing here in Cuba. Let's remember that not long ago, Cuba also was the place where were agreed the peace agreements between FARC and the Colombian government.
Thank Laura for that report. 2 members of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel have been arrested in connection with the disappearance of 3 Italian businessmen in January. The missing Italians were last seen on January 31st in Tecalitan in the western state of Jalisco. According to the investigation, the victims were picked up in Tecalitan and handed over to the cartel. Communication with them was then lost.
We have information that José Guadalupe is probably connected with the disappearance of 3 Italian citizens in Tecalitlán, Jalisco. Last January 31st, through field work and investigation, personnel from federal security forces obtained information where José Guadalupe is likely responsible for handing over money to officers in Tecalitlán municipality.
700 Chilean taxi drivers have driven through the streets of Santiago to protest the mobile app-based taxi services Uber and Cabify. The protest was organized by the National Confederation of Taxi Drivers. They also filed a written complaint to the Transportation Minister. Uber has faced protest bans and restrictions around the world as it hampers traditional taxi operators and cuts into their profits through unfair competition. We go now to Argentina, where teachers in the province of Buenos Aires are on strike. They called for a 48-hour strike to demand better working conditions and an improved budget for education. A march is also scheduled for Tuesday, in which teachers will head to the Ministry of Education to highlight the lack of action by the government of Mauricio Macri. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has the details.
Yes, classes should have started today, both in the province of Buenos Aires as well as in the capital city and 3 other districts, after the end of the winter holidays. There was a lot of expectation around this, with the parity negotiations which the unions had been demanding from Mauricio Macri's government since 2017. But the government refused, and there have been repressive measures taken in some districts, including Buenos Aires province, where the governor, María Eugenia Vidal, imposed heavy fines on the teachers. So the teachers are now holding this 48-hour strike, which will continue tomorrow. Next week, the university teachers are expected to join the action because they are also facing a very difficult situation. They have had no wage increase at a time when inflation is said to be more than 18% for this year, 2018, but also because of the lack of the teaching materials and basic supplies in the public education sector. And all this is getting worse with the budget cuts imposed as a result of Macri's negotiations with the IMF. So we can expect the conflict to intensify, with more industrial action as the government refuses to negotiate with the teachers.
Thanks, Edgardo, for that report. Still in Argentina, various social sectors held a festival in the capital, Buenos Aires, to reject a reform to the penal code that regulates minor violations of the law.
Under the motto, "Our culture is not a crime," organizers decried the proposed reform to the penal code because it would increase the oppressive power of the police in Buenos Aires and endangers workers, street vendors and street artists.
The police came to evict us, to leave us homeless. They came with clear instructions to stop us from performing our art and educating people.
They finally managed to kick us out and close the door on us. They told us we could not return, and they do this because it's a political issue.
Protesters warned about Macri's administration, which is using security forces and local government bodies to persecute self-sustaining cultural spaces that create new ways of thinking and promote culture.
They want
to rid the streets of everything that goes against their economic and political model.
According to activists, ever since the Cambiemos alliance came to power in 2015, economic strangling and intimidation tactics are used as a tool against mobilization and social gatherings by the people.
We strongly believe that art must push for political action, because it can't only be a way to have fun or to pass the time. Artists must take part in social movements.
Facing an ongoing increase of institutional attacks that includes the forced disappearances, political imprisonment, and even murder, residents of Buenos Aires reject the actions of the neoliberal government that criminalize various social sectors.
We'll take a short break now, but join us again after this look at what our multimedia colleagues are reporting.
جزء لا يتجزأ من القضية الفلسطينية، ولازم يكون عندنا نساء واعيات على اللي بيصير بالضبط عندنا وبالوطن عشان تقدر تنشئ جيل قوي قادر على مواجهة الاحتلال، وبنحكي بالنهاية للاحتلال انقلاب.
Welcome back. Israeli occupation forces have detained at least 20 Palestinians. This was part of a series of raids in Ramallah and other cities in the West Bank. Among them were 4 journalists from the Al-Quds channel, including the director of its West Bank headquarters. Local sources say that the journalist's vehicle was confiscated along with their equipment. While they were being taken, Palestinians threw stones at the Israeli soldiers. The presidents of Eritrea and Somalia have announced that they plan to establish diplomatic relations after more than a decade of hostility. Somali President Mohamed Abdullahi is on a state visit to Eritrea for meetings with his counterpart Isaias Afwerki. In a joint statement, the two leaders said that their countries will establish diplomatic relations and exchange ambassadors, promote bilateral trade and investment, as well as educational and cultural exchanges. This declaration comes just 3 weeks after Eritrea and Ethiopia ended 2 decades of conflict. The Congolese opposition leader Jean-Pierre Bemba plans to return to the Democratic Republic of Congo to register for the presidential elections in December. He's coming back to the DRC after a decade in prison in The Hague over war crime convictions. But President Joseph Kabila's ruling coalition says Bemba should be declared ineligible to stand in the election because of a witness tampering case against him in The Hague. Bemba was convicted of war crimes and violations against the human rights post-presidential elections in 2006 when fighters loyal to him clashed with state troops, but he was acquitted of those charges in May. As Malians await the vote count of the presidential elections held on Sunday, the two main parties have announced their projections. The incumbent president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keita's IIBK party, announced that according to their initial estimates, they are largely in the lead, whereas the opposition party, led by Somalia Crease, said that it would likely go to a runoff. The official results are expected on Friday.
According to initial results from the EPM Alliance's centralization system, the general trend indicates that candidate Ibrahim Boubacar Keita is well in the lead. However, due to the electoral law prohibiting the dissemination of results, the EPM alliance awaits the official results, which should soon be communicated by the competent authorities.
Daisy Osaku, an Italian athlete of Nigerian origins, suffered a drive-by attack by two men. Her attackers threw eggs at her face while she was crossing a street in Moncaleri, near Turin, on Sunday night. She was taken to the hospital of Turin, where she received medical treatment. As footage filmed on Monday shows, the reason for the attack remains unknown. However, the 22-year-old athlete doesn't exclude that racism might have been the motivation for the attack.
Racism is all around the world. I've always said, you wanted colonialism. Now you cannot complain if people spread around the world. There are Italians living abroad. There are other people living in Italy. I don't understand why someone tries to find a pretext to blame this or that. There are good and bad people in any race, of any skin color, any height, any color of eyes and hair. But to generalize and to think in typologies, in my opinion, is wrong. Not to exaggerate that it is the same thing that Hitler did with the Jews. They can say that I'm exaggerating, but it is these things that generate the wars that we have all studied.
We've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at talisyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Talis Your English, I'm Suni Gray. Thank you so much for watching.
In South America and the Caribbean, we face challenges, looking for ways of contributing to solutions to the nations. With a uniting feeling, though before the attack of those imposing themselves, we defend an ideal of an inspiring struggle.